Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am so glad to be back here with you today. Before I get into this episode, I want to say a couple of things. First, I am recovering from a pretty bad cold right now, so I might sound a little congested, and I'll definitely be pausing a lot for coughing. I will do my best not to subject you to too much grossness, but it is something I am struggling with at the moment. But I did not want to run the risk of missing an episode. It's very important to me that I stick with this schedule, so bear with me as I get through this week. I also wanted to briefly just mention I had a really interesting week last week. I went to New York City. I had the pleasure of dog sitting for a friend of mine and was able to stay in her apartment in Brooklyn for a week. And it was really a great experience, and I had a great time. But I had a number of really cool Michael Jackson-oriented experiences. My first day in the city, I went to see MJ the Musical on Broadway. Now, I have seen this musical a few times before, but I was thrilled to win a Broadway lottery ticket. If you ever travel to New York City or ever go and try to see a Broadway show, you know they are very expensive to get tickets to, but a lottery ticket is about a quarter of the cost of your average ticket. And you don't know where you're going to sit. You just win and they send you anywhere. But I was very lucky. I won a ticket and I got really good seats, and it was just phenomenal. I love MJ the Musical. If you are able to see it, I highly recommend it. Hopefully, it will be even more global over the coming years. I know it's, of course, touring around the world in different places, but hopefully it will continue to become more accessible. And if you are in the US, make sure you look for those tour dates if you can. It's a great, great show. I also, because I was staying in Brooklyn, I also went to the subway station where the Bad music video was filmed. And that was really cool. Apparently, a portion of the station is closed. It's no longer in operation. And I think that's where at least part of the short film was filmed. But I did walk around and take some pictures, and it was just really neat to see something that looked so familiar and to just know that Michael recorded something so iconic there. If you've seen the Bad 25 documentary, then you may remember this, but there's a part where they are talking about the filming of that music video, and Michael apparently commented to someone on the set, like, "Oh yes, there's pee all over the wall. That's perfect." At the subway. And I can attest, there is still pee all over the walls at the subway. So not much has changed in 35 years. But no, it was a very cool experience. I was also very happy to visit several bookstores. I bought some Michael Jackson books that I didn't own before, and I'm really excited about. I bought the In the Studio with MJ book by Bruce Swedien. And if you're not familiar, Bruce Swedien was one of the producers and audio technicians and engineers that he worked with, who was a really integral part of pretty much every album that Michael put out as an adult, which was really cool. So he wrote a book about his experience with Michael, and I found it. I also found the book about the Dangerous album. If you're not familiar, there is a book series called 33 and a Third that is put out by, I think, Bloomsbury. And they have this book series where each book is really small, but it is covering one iconic album. And the 100th book released in this series was covering Michael's Dangerous album. And I found that at a bookstore. So I was thrilled. I didn't expect that, but I was really excited. So a few other things really cool happen that I may talk about in the future. But those are just a couple of really neat and nice experiences I had that were Michael oriented while I was in New York. And it was excellent. So I'm very happy I went for a number of reasons, despite getting sick while being there. It's probably all that pee on the subway. Sorry, you don't tune in to hear about that. So let me move on from the grossness and we'll get into this episode. One last thing I did want to say before getting into this episode is that I'm really bad at reminding people to follow this show and subscribe to this show and leave reviews for this show. So if you are someone who has been listening for a while, or even if you're new, if you find that you enjoy this podcast, please don't be shy. Please leave a review if you feel so inclined. I would love that. Or rate the show in some way. I believe on Spotify you can rate it. I don't know that you can leave reviews, but on Apple Podcasts, I know that you can leave reviews. Either way, I would love to read that type of feedback from you. And it definitely helps the show be recommended to more people as well. With that said, I want us to move on to the 26th piece here in Dancing the Dream. Now, this is a very short piece this week. It's one of the shortest pieces in the entire book. It is certainly more in line with a reflection than any other type of writing Michael has done. It's just kind of some collected thoughts I think he had about the subject. So we will read through this piece, have a brief discussion, and then close. But I do have some things I want to say and share regarding this time of the year in mid-June and some stuff that I think is really relevant to the piece itself. So with that said, get comfy, get cozy, and without further ado, join me for this reading of On Children of the World. On Children of the World. We have to heal our wounded world. The chaos, despair, and senseless destruction we see today are a result of the alienation that people feel from each other and their environment. Often this alienation has its roots in an emotionally deprived childhood. Children have had their childhood stolen from them. A child's mind needs the nourishment of mystery, magic, wonder, and excitement. I want my work to help people rediscover the child that's hiding in them. So like I said, this is a very short piece from Michael, but there is still some great wisdom in his words here. And I actually think that this piece is especially relevant in today's world more than anything. Now, I don't want to talk about politics or, any of the actual specific global issues happening today, in part because I don't think it's needed, but also because I am thrilled and honored that a huge portion of the listeners of this podcast are not American. And I don't want to speak from that perspective as if that is the only thing happening in the world. It certainly is not. But I do think that there are some collective things we could reflect on here. When Michael says that we have to heal the wounded world and that people are alienated from each other and the environment. Now, the first thing I actually think of in terms of today's world is how alienated we are from one another, in part because of technology. Now, like I said, it's an amazing thing that people from all around the world can listen to this little podcast that I create, who don't know me and will never meet me likely, but they can listen to this. That's an incredible thing that technology allows. The friendships that we can build online, especially through fandom, for example, that we can connect with people globally and become close and bond and connect and feel more connected to the world because of that. These are amazing things that are offered to us because of the internet and because of technology. But on a day-to-day basis, in so many ways that I observe, I do feel that we are in an especially disconnected world right now. The more connected we become on a global level, the less connected we seem to be on a micro level. And I say that specifically because of obsessions and addictions with phones and being tuned in and tapped in on social media, to just kind of pouring our energy into these devices that keep us from being present in the space around us with the people directly surrounding us. I actually think about it sometimes when I take a walk, because I take a lot of walks and I listen to music, which is of course wonderful, but occasionally it occurs to me, like, when I'm listening to music, I am blocking out the sounds of the world around me. And actually, when I was in New York, I found myself, I walked all over the city with headphones on, in part because it was just fun. Also because, there's such sensory overload, it can help me to kind of feel a little bit more grounded at times, to block out some of that intensity. But I also a few times realized, like, there's a whole sensory environment of this city that I am missing out on. The sounds of the city that I am not experiencing because I'm blocking it out with music. And that is just a very minor and sort of minimal example of what I'm talking about here. The point being, it's very easy to step away from the present in today's world, especially to kind of pull yourself out of the moment. And as enjoyable as it might be where we go when we do that, when we are experiencing that kind of global connectivity by syncing ourselves into our devices, for example, it can also be kind of a distancing, like he says, an alienation from the people around us, from the world around us, the environment around us. The constant distraction of what is happening somewhere else that's not within us can certainly make you feel less connected to what is happening around you. But Michael says this has a root in an emotionally deprived childhood, or it often does. And I think that's a great point. I often wonder, outside of these technologies simply feeling addictive and being addictive in some ways, what drives us to constantly be distracted, to constantly seek distraction from our lives, to not want to sit in the quiet of our own minds? And I do think there's something to be said for that alienation, and maybe there being a sense of emotional struggle. I know for myself, and again, I am only speaking for myself, I know that when I am avoiding things, I sink myself further into distraction. And avoiding things never really works, because you can only avoid something for so long. It will get you in the end. Whatever the concern is you have, whatever the responsibility, the fear, it almost always will come back at you. You can't escape it. That's just life. So I do feel like, despite the fact that the way I'm approaching this is a little different than how Michael wrote it, I do feel that it still reinforces what he had said. Last thing I will say about the technology stuff, when he talks about this emotionally deprived childhood, I think about how, as you all know, I teach college, and my students who are, anywhere from 18 to 20, 21 years old, they'll talk about their concerns about the future with their younger siblings and seeing these kids losing so much of their childhoods to the internet and to connectivity and screen time and all of that, and not feeling like they are experiencing childhood. I say all of this because this was 30 years ago that Michael wrote this, or more than 30 years ago that he wrote this. And the world he was talking about was quite different, but all of this was still true. And I would suggest it's only become more true. And I guess that's why I'm focusing on that. Looking at Michael's plea for us to heal the wounded world, to protect childhoods so that we can grow into connected adults who love each other and care for each other and for the world that we all live within. This need is only growing. It's not getting better. It's just growing. And it's more important all the time. And so that's something I love about these pieces, but also breaks my heart about them, is that Michael was saying these things such a long time ago, and yet we're no better, and in many ways we're much worse. So these are really important reminders. As short as this piece is, it's an important reminder. What can we do in our own lives to encourage us to not feel so alienated, to encourage us to feel and be more connected to one another, but also in that process to really value the childhood experience, whether in our own children or the children we're related to or interact with or know or, babysit for, or whatever our circumstances are. How can we protect that? Something I really like as well is that he mentions how he wants his work to help people rediscover the child that's hiding inside of them through the nourishment of mystery, magic, wonder, and excitement. And I will always remember when I first discovered Michael Jackson and the absolute overwhelm, the sensory overload of him. And I still feel that very often, but when I first discovered him, it was a level of awe and wonder in watching him, in listening to him, in everything about his art that absolutely enlivened that part of me. And that's what's interesting about Michael. I don't feel like he made music for children. I mean, he has very mature themes in his music. I mean, think about just his biggest song, Billie Jean, is a very mature song, but there's something about the way he created his music videos, the way he performed these songs that elicited a kind of magic that translates both to actual children and to the children inside of us that are seeking to be amazed and to be shocked and bewildered by this newness of his talent, Needless to say, I really like this piece, and I'm actually really touched that this piece came up when it did, because with the title, On Children of the World, I want to acknowledge that we just passed a very meaningful anniversary. On June 13th, 2025, which was just a few days ago by the time this airs, on June 13th, we reached the 20-year anniversary of the day that Michael Jackson was found not guilty of the charges against him in the 2005 trial in which he was charged with child sexual abuse. This day in the fandom is often referred to as Vindication Day, and since I've become a fan, every year on June 13th, I've really tried in my own heart to honor that day because I, of course, believe fully and wholeheartedly in Michael Jackson's innocence. And I would not be able to be the fan that I am or even create this podcast if I didn't fully believe in his innocence. But to have such a day pass, every year I have tried to consider and honor and in some way commemorate this passing, either by reading something or listening to something or watching the video of when the not guilty verdict was announced. And it's emotional to me. It's an emotional thing for all fans, I think, especially knowing that these allegations really did destroy a large portion of Michael's adult life and in a lot of ways led to his early death. And of course, the anniversary of his death is later this month. And that's also a very difficult time for fans. So all of this happening in June, I wanted to recognize that when we read these pieces about Michael's perspective on children and childhood, I think it's really important that we truly take the time to understand his perspective and understand that his appreciation and admiration for childhood was a completely pure thing that came from a real sense of valuing what childhood is meant to be and represent, and valuing in his own self-reflection what he had lost in his own lack of a childhood. Michael, in my opinion, I've said this many times on the podcast, Michael was an exceptionally wise person. And his perspectives, his values, I think they're not always easily understood by other people. But I do believe his work, his writing, the way he breaks down throughout this whole book, his reasons for valuing innocence and valuing wonder and magic in children, I think it makes it abundantly clear that this is his perspective and why it is a philosophical and almost spiritual perspective that he had on children. With this said, if you did not know, this anniversary just passed, now you do. If you did know, I think it's just an important reminder that there are so many ways we can educate ourselves about Michael Jackson and his relationship to children. And I just want to leave 2 recommendations from my perspective. I have found great solace by educating myself in a few different ways. And the 2 pieces I want to recommend that were really instrumental for me are, first, the book Conspiracy by Aphrodite Jones. This book I actually did not read until about 2 years into my fandom, but I bought this book and I read it all in basically one sitting. It is outstanding. Aphrodite Jones was a journalist who covered the 2005 trial. She went into it believing that Michael Jackson was guilty, as so many people did, but through her observation of the trial, sitting in every single day of the trial, she heard the evidence, she heard the arguments firsthand, and she reported back. She wrote this book years later after doing tremendous research, and ultimately wrote a book that reported in painstaking detail what happened in the courtroom. And it is an in-depth investigation and report that makes it abundantly clear that trial itself in 2005 was very much a ridiculous publicity stunt and should definitely be researched further before people assume that Michael being accused equates to him being guilty, because it certainly doesn't. So I strongly recommend that book. I also truly and very strongly recommend the podcast series, Michael Jackson, The Case for Innocence. This is an incredibly well-researched podcast that goes through every allegation throughout Michael's life and after his death with the Leaving Neverland documentaries that came out. It goes through more detail than you can possibly imagine exists. It is extremely well done, very well researched. As a person who has a PhD and went through strenuous academic research myself, I can honestly say it is evident to me that the creators of this podcast truly know what they are doing and take it very seriously. I strongly recommend it to anyone who would like to deep dive and it has not had the opportunity to yet. With this said, I want to leave you there. I know this was a little bit of a different episode. I didn't get quite as deep with the piece itself, but I do think it's important to talk about this anniversary and to, as fans, make sure we are educated about the allegations and we are educated so that when we are accused of, which I know we all have been, of ignoring what some people believe are true allegations because we simply love his music, that no, we are not. And we can speak on it in an educated way to defend Michael, but to also represent him well. It's not about attacking people. It's not about belittling actual sexual abuse in any way. It is about recognizing that unfortunately, false accusations do exist. And in the case of Michael Jackson, there is tremendous amounts of evidence that support his innocence over all else. So with that said, I am going to draw this episode to a close. Next week, I will be releasing 2 episodes. On Tuesday, June 24th, I will be releasing my normal episode of Reading Michael Jackson, the 27th piece. And on June 25th, the anniversary of Michael Jackson's death, I will be releasing a bonus episode as well. So please stay tuned for that. It is, as always, a difficult week for us as fans, and June is a difficult month, but we will get through it in honor of Michael and his legacy and the love that he spread throughout the world. So I look forward to talking with you next week. Thank you so much for enduring my sick voice. And hopefully by the next time I record, I will sound a little bit better. Have a wonderful week and we will talk soon.